I'm sitting in my office at the venture capital firm I founded, watching the news coverage of David Richardson's bankruptcy filing. His tech company just collapsed. His investors lost everything. His reputation is destroyed, and I'm the reason why. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 62 years old, worth $400 million, and I just spent 5 years orchestrating the complete destruction of the man who ruined my life 25 years ago. This is the story of how a cheating boyfriend created his own worst enemy. I was 37 years old in 1999. I had just finished my MBA from Stanford, top of my class. I was brilliant with numbers, unstoppable in negotiations, and absolutely in love with David Richardson. David was 39, charming, ambitious, and convincing. He was building a startup, an early e-commerce platform called ShopStream. He needed capital. He needed business expertise. He needed someone who could handle the financial side while he played visionary CEO. That someone was me. I invested everything I had, $200,000 from my savings, my signing bonus from 3 tech companies that wanted to hire me, and my inheritance from my father. Every penny I owned went into ShopStream. But I wasn't just an investor. I was the chief financial officer. I built the financial models. I pitched to venture capitalists. I negotiated supplier contracts. I worked 18-hour days while David schmoozed with tech journalists and gave TED Talks about the future of online retail. We were also engaged. David proposed 6 months into the company's launch. Margaret, you're my partner in business and in life. We're building an empire together. I was ecstatic. I was going to marry the man I loved and build $1 billion company with him. Then I got pregnant. David's reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't celebrate. He got quiet, distant. Margaret, this changes everything. The company needs us focused. Can we wait? I was shocked. Wait? David, I'm already pregnant. I'm 37. This might be my only chance to have a child. I know. The timing is bad. Something felt wrong. David started working late, missing dinners, taking mysterious phone calls. I told myself he was stressed about the company. Then I found the emails. David wasn't just working late. He was having an affair with Jessica Monroe, a 26-year-old marketing associate we'd hired 3 months earlier. Young, blonde, energetic. Everything I apparently wasn't. The emails were devastating. Jessica, you make me feel young again. Margaret is brilliant, but exhausting. All business, no fun. You remind me what life should be. I confronted him in our shared apartment. I was 4 months pregnant, showing, vulnerable, and heartbroken. David, I found the emails. You're cheating on me with Jessica? He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize. He just looked tired. Margaret, I can't do this anymore. The engagement is off. I'm in love with Jessica. She's what I need right now. I'm pregnant with your child. I know, and I'll support the baby financially, but I can't marry you. I don't love you anymore. The next part was worse. Margaret, I need you to step down from ShopStream. This is too complicated. Jessica is taking over as CFO. You can keep your investment shares, but you can't work at the company anymore. It's too awkward. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You're firing me from the company I built? I pitched to every investor. I created every financial model. ShopStream exists because of my work, and you'll profit when it goes public. But I can't work with you anymore. I'm sorry. He wasn't sorry. He was replacing me, in business and in life, with a younger woman. I was 37, pregnant, heartbroken, unemployed, and discarded. David married Jessica 8 months later, 1 month after my daughter Emily was born. The wedding was covered in tech magazines. ShopStream CEO David Richardson marries CFO Jessica Monroe in stunning Napa Valley ceremony. My daughter and I weren't mentioned. The next 5 years were the hardest of my life. David did pay child support, barely. $500 a month. For a man building a multi-million-dollar company, it was insulting. But legally, that's all he was required to pay. He never visited Emily, never called, never sent birthday cards. He completely erased us from his life. Meanwhile, ShopStream was thriving. David and Jessica took the company public in 2002. The IPO valued ShopStream at $800 million. My original investment, the $200,000 I'd put in, was now worth $12 million on paper. But David had included a clause in the shareholder agreement I'd signed back when I was in love and trusting. I couldn't sell my shares for 10 years without board approval. I was locked in. I couldn't access my money. I watched David and Jessica become tech celebrities while I struggled to pay rent and raise Emily alone. I took consulting jobs. I lived frugally. I put every spare dollar into Emily's education fund, and I watched David from a distance. ShopStream grew. David became a tech darling. He gave keynote speeches. He appeared on magazine covers, the visionary who revolutionized e-commerce. No one mentioned that his original CFO, the woman who built the financial foundation, had been me. I was written out of the story entirely. In 2004, I finally got permission to sell some of my ShopStream shares. Not all. David's board blocked that. But enough. I sold 30% and walked away with $4 million. Most people would have been thrilled, but I wasn't. I was angry. David had stolen my work, my credit, and 5 years of my life. He'd abandoned his daughter. He'd become rich and famous while I'd struggled, and he'd gotten away with all of it. That's when I decided I wasn't going to just rebuild my life. I was going to become more powerful than David could ever imagine. I took that $4 million and started my own venture capital firm, Chen Capital Partners. I had advantages David didn't understand. I'd spent 5 years watching the tech industry from the outside. I'd consulted for dozens of startups. I knew what worked and what didn't. I knew which founders were genuine and which were frauds. I knew what red flags to look for. Overpromising CEOs, toxic company cultures, financial models that didn't add up. I knew exactly what to avoid because I'd lived through it with David. My investment strategy was simple. Find brilliant founders who were overlooked. Women, immigrants, older entrepreneurs, people the traditional VC world ignored. Give them capital and mentorship. Build companies that actually mattered. It worked. My first major success was investing in a female-founded cybersecurity startup in 2006. Invested $500,000 at a $2 million valuation. The company was acquired by Cisco 4 years later for $400 million. My stake was worth $80 million. I was suddenly wealthy, really wealthy. I reinvested everything. More startups, more overlooked founders, more wins. By 2010, Chen Capital Partners had invested in 43 companies. 31 were successful. 8 had massive exits. My personal net worth hit $200 million. I was now wealthier than David, but I wasn't satisfied. Wealth wasn't revenge. David was still celebrated, still famous, still the face of ShopStream. I wanted more than money. I wanted justice. In 2012, I started paying closer attention to ShopStream again. The company was struggling. Amazon had become the dominant e-commerce platform. ShopStream's market share was declining. Stock price was falling. David was still CEO, but he wasn't the visionary everyone thought he was. He'd gotten lucky with timing in the early 2000s. Now, facing real competition, he was floundering. Jessica had divorced him in 2010. Apparently, David had cheated on her with another employee. Karma is real. David was now 52 years old, twice divorced, and losing his grip on the company he'd built on my work. That's when I saw the opportunity. I started researching ShopStream's financials. As a former shareholder, I still had access to investor documents. What I found was shocking. David had been cooking the books for years. Not dramatically, not Enron-style fraud, but small, consistent manipulations, revenue recognition games, aggressive accounting, inflated projections, all technically legal but deeply dishonest. David was presenting ShopStream as healthier than it actually was, and Wall Street believed him. I hired a team of forensic accountants, find every accounting irregularity, every optimistic projection, every misleading statement. I want everything. It took 2 years and cost me $3 million, but the report was devastating. ShopStream had overstated revenue by 12% for 7 consecutive quarters. David had sold millions in personal shares based on false projections. The company's actual financial health was far worse than disclosed. It wasn't quite illegal. David had good lawyers, but it was deeply unethical. If exposed, it would destroy investor confidence. I now had ammunition, but I needed to be strategic. I couldn't just release the report. David would claim it was a vendetta from a bitter ex. The media would side with him. Successful CEO versus scorned former girlfriend. I'd look petty. I needed a different approach. I spent 4 years building the perfect trap. First, I became a major investor in ShopStream's competitors. I used shell companies and investment funds to hide my involvement, but I poured $200 million into 3 companies competing directly with ShopStream. I gave them everything they needed to win: capital, strategic advice, industry connections. I helped them poach ShopStream's best employees. I introduced them to ShopStream's suppliers and negotiated better deals. ShopStream's market share declined from 32% to 19%. David blamed market conditions. It was actually me systematically dismantling his competitive advantages. Second, I cultivated relationships with ShopStream's board members. I never mentioned my history with David. I was just another successful venture capitalist who occasionally shared market insights. I planted seeds of doubt. Have you noticed ShopStream's revenue recognition practices? Quite aggressive compared to industry standards. David's made some interesting accounting choices. All legal, of course, but optimistic. I've heard employee morale is low. High turnover in engineering. That's usually a bad sign. I never pushed too hard, just gentle questions that made board members start paying attention. Third, I built relationships with tech journalists. I became a source for industry trends. I gave them valuable information about other companies. I built trust, and occasionally I'd mention ShopStream. Interesting company. I've heard their financials might not be as solid as they appear. Just rumors, of course. Fourth, and this was the most important, I recruited Emily. My daughter was now 23 years old, brilliant and angry. She'd grown up without a father. David had never met her, never called, never acknowledged her existence. Emily had graduated from MIT with degrees in computer science and business. She was perfect. Emily, how would you like to work at ShopStream? She understood immediately. You want me to go undercover? I want you to see the company from the inside. Document everything. David doesn't know you exist. You're using my maiden name. You're invisible to him. Emily got hired as a product manager in 2017. She was talented. She would have been hired anyway. But I made sure the right people saw her resume. For 2 years, Emily worked at ShopStream and sent me information, employee complaints, toxic management, financial irregularities, everything David didn't want exposed. Mom, it's worse than you thought. David screams at employees. He takes credit for other people's work. The engineering team is ready to quit. The company is barely functional. Perfect. By 2019, everything was in place. ShopStream was struggling. Competitors were winning. Board members were concerned. Journalists were asking questions. And I had documentation of every shady practice David had ever committed. I waited for the perfect moment. It came in February 2020. Right before the pandemic. ShopStream announced fourth quarter earnings. David claimed the company was positioned for unprecedented growth. The stock jumped 15% on his announcement. That's when I struck. I sent my forensic accounting report to 3 journalists I'd cultivated relationships with all at once, along with Emily's internal documentation, employee complaints, emails showing David's toxic behavior, everything. I didn't identify myself as the source. I used an anonymous, encrypted email. As far as anyone knew, this came from a concerned insider. The first article dropped 48 hours later in TechCrunch. ShopStream's accounting practices raise questions. Former employees allege misleading revenue reports. Then Bloomberg, ShopStream CEO David Richardson faces scrutiny over aggressive projections. Then the Wall Street Journal, inside ShopStream, employees describe toxic culture and financial irregularities. The articles didn't accuse David of fraud. That would be legally risky. But they raised enough questions that investors panicked. ShopStream's stock crashed 28% in 3 days. The SEC opened an investigation into the company's accounting practices. David went on CNBC to defend himself. These allegations are baseless. ShopStream's finances are completely transparent. This is a coordinated attack by short sellers. He looked desperate, defensive, guilty. The board lost confidence. 2 weeks after the articles dropped, they fired David as CEO. ShopStream board removes founder David Richardson amid accounting and investigation. David issued a statement. I'm disappointed by the board's decision. I built ShopStream from nothing. This is a witch hunt, but it wasn't over. David thought losing his CEO position was the worst that could happen. He was wrong. The SEC investigation continued for 18 months. They found exactly what my forensic accountants had found: aggressive accounting, misleading projections, and insider trading. David had sold $40 million in stock based on inflated projections. In September 2021, the SEC charged David with securities fraud. He settled without admitting wrongdoing, but paid a $23 million fine and was banned from serving as an officer of any public company for 10 years. His reputation was destroyed. Tech magazines that had once celebrated him now published retrospectives. The rise and fall of David Richardson, how a tech darling lost everything. But I still wasn't done. While David was fighting the SEC, I executed the final phase of my plan. I quietly acquired a majority stake in ShopStream through various investment vehicles. The company was cheap. The stock had crashed to $12 from a high of $98. I spent $80 million and became the largest shareholder. In early 2022, I called a shareholder meeting and voted David off the board entirely. He was completely out, no position, no shares. He'd been forced to sell them to pay SEC fines, no connection to the company he'd founded. Then I installed myself as executive chairwoman, and then I installed Emily as CEO. The press release was beautiful. ShopStream announces new leadership. Margaret Chen, founder of Chen Capital Partners, and original ShopStream CFO, named executive chairwoman. Emily Chen, MIT graduate and former product manager, named CEO. David must have read that announcement and felt his soul leave his body. The woman he'd betrayed 25 years ago was now running his company. The daughter he'd abandoned was now the CEO. Under our leadership, ShopStream stabilized. We fixed the toxic culture. We improved the products. We were honest with investors. The company didn't become Amazon, but it survived, and that was enough. I didn't see David in person for 25 years after he left me, not once. But in October 2024, he showed up at my office. My assistant buzzed. "Ms. Chen, there's a David Richardson here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but says it's urgent." I smiled. "Send him in." David walked into my corner office at Chen Capital Partners. He looked terrible. 64 years old, but looked 70. Graying, tired, defeated. He stood in front of my desk. I didn't invite him to sit. Margaret, David, silence. He looked around my office. The awards, the photos with tech CEOs, the magazine covers featuring me, the view of San Francisco Bay. "You destroyed me," he said quietly. "No, David, you destroyed yourself. I just documented it. You spent years planning this. The competitive investments, the journalists, Emily working undercover, the SEC investigation, taking over ShopStream. This was all you. Actually, the SEC investigation was legitimate. You committed securities fraud. I just made sure the right people noticed. You ruined my life. You ruined mine first." David's face twisted. "That was 25 years ago. You're still angry about something that happened when we were young?" This was the moment I'd waited for. "David, do you want to know what the last 25 years were like for me?" I didn't wait for an answer. I was pregnant, heartbroken, and unemployed. You paid $500 a month in child support, less than my rent. I worked 3 jobs while raising Emily alone. You never called her, never visited, never sent a birthday card. She grew up without a father because you decided she didn't fit your image. Meanwhile, you became rich and famous using the company I built. Every article called you a self-made entrepreneur. But ShopStream's financial models, investor pitches, and supplier contracts, I created them. You just took credit. You thought I'd disappear. You thought I'd be a footnote. You thought wrong. David slumped. "What do you want from me?" "An apology." "I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry for how I treated you. I'm sorry for abandoning Emily. I was young and stupid and selfish. I'm 64 years old. I'm broke. I'm banned from the industry. I lost everything. So what now? Do you want me to beg? Do you want me to grovel? What will make you happy?" I leaned back in my chair. "David, I don't want anything from you. I already have everything. I have a $400 million fortune. I run one of the most successful venture capital firms in Silicon Valley. I have a daughter who's a brilliant CEO. I have respect, influence, and power. And you? You're unemployable, bankrupt and forgotten. The industry you once dominated doesn't remember you as a visionary. They remember you as a fraud who got caught. So no, David, I don't need an apology. I don't need closure. I don't need anything from you. I just wanted you to know that everything you lost, the company, the reputation, the legacy, it's because you betrayed the wrong person. David stood there, broken. Can I at least meet Emily? She's my daughter. I know I have no right to ask, but Emily doesn't want to meet you. I asked her. She said, the man who abandoned me doesn't get to be my father now that he needs something. She's wiser than both of us. David turned to leave. At the door, he stopped. You know what's funny? I used to think you were cold. All business. No heart. I told Jessica you were brilliant, but unforgiving. I was right about the brilliant part, but you're not unforgiving, Margaret. You're patient. You waited 25 years to destroy me, and you did it perfectly. I don't know whether to be impressed or terrified. I smiled. Be both. David left. I never saw him again. It's been 6 months since David came to my office. I've heard he's working as a consultant for small startups, making maybe $100,000 a year. It's honest work, more honest than anything he did at ShopStream. Emily is thriving as CEO. ShopStream's stock has recovered to $42. We're not competing with Amazon, but we're profitable, ethical, and stable. I'm still running Chen Capital Partners. We've invested in over 200 companies now, 73 successful exits, thousands of jobs created, billions in economic value. I've been invited to speak at Stanford Business School about entrepreneurship. The irony isn't lost on me. David used to give those talks. I don't mention David in my speeches. He's not worth the oxygen. Instead, I talk about resilience, about building something real, about the long game. Success isn't about being the loudest or the most charismatic, I tell the students. It's about being the smartest, the most prepared, and the most patient. If someone betrays you, don't seek immediate revenge. Build something they can never touch. Become someone they can never compete with. Win so completely that they become irrelevant. The students always applaud. They think I'm speaking generally. I'm not. People ask me if I'm happy with how things turned out. The answer is complicated. Am I glad I destroyed David? Yes. He deserved it. Am I proud of building Chen Capital Partners and raising Emily? Absolutely. Do I regret spending 25 years planning revenge? Sometimes. But here's what I've learned. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's creation. I didn't win because I destroyed David. I won because I built something better. David thought betraying me would free him from a cold, businesslike partner. Instead, it created a competitor who understood his weaknesses intimately. He thought abandoning Emily would let him focus on success. Instead, it created a daughter who became everything he pretended to be: brilliant, ethical, and genuinely successful. He thought I'd fade away, broken and defeated. Instead, I became wealthier, more influential, and more respected than he ever was. The revenge wasn't in taking away his company. It was in proving that I never needed him in the first place. I'm 62 years old now. Emily is 35, happily married, and thinking about having children. I might become a grandmother soon. When I look back at the last 25 years, I see two paths. The path David took: betrayal, shortcuts, ego, and eventual collapse. The path I took: hard work, patience, integrity, and lasting success. David thought he was choosing the easier path when he left me for someone younger and fired me from the company I built. He was wrong. The easy path led to SEC investigations, bankruptcy, and irrelevance. The hard path led to $400 million, a thriving firm, and a daughter who's changing the tech industry. Every time I read about David, and there are still occasional articles about cautionary tales in tech leadership, I feel a quiet satisfaction, not because I destroyed him, but because I proved that betraying me was the worst business decision of his life. 25 years ago, David Richardson thought he could discard me and take credit for my work. Today, I run his company, I control his legacy, and I'm worth more than he ever was. And he's consulting for startups for $100,000 a year, telling founders about his experience while carefully avoiding mentioning how it all ended. That's not revenge, that's karma. And I was just the mechanism that delivered it. David Richardson threw away the best business partner he ever had because he wanted someone younger and less challenging. I spent 25 years becoming someone he could never challenge. He's 64, broke, and forgotten. I'm 62, worth $400 million, and just getting started. The woman he thought was too cold became the most feared investor in Silicon Valley. The daughter he abandoned became CEO of his company. The life he destroyed rebuilt itself 1,000 times stronger. That's what happens when you cheat on a woman who's smarter than you'll ever be.